Greetings, my friends everywhere out there. Believe me, it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be with you on this day. We're out in the country almost here, as you can see. We're in Rooster Front Park. And just behind me is where Steel Creek and Beaver Creek have their confluence. It's a beautiful spot. And of course you may see the big rock here by me. I think that must have come off the mountain somewhere. It is not original to the site, I don't believe. But before I get into any story today, I want to put out this inquiry. I know there's lots of people out there viewing this, and maybe there's someone who can tell me how Rooster Front Park came to be or how it got the name. It's a picturesque name, a very unusual name, but I get inquiries often as to how this got its name. Being the city historian now for the last few years, naturally I get questions all over, and this is one I haven't been able to answer, and it's kind of embarrassing when I can't answer the questions. People call in, they think I know everything. I don't, but this is one of the things I don't know. So if you happen to know what gave this park, it's a beautiful place, I love it, its name, I would like to know. You can call me, my phone number's in the newspaper every Sunday under my column, and I live at 214 Johnson Street in Bristol, Virginia, if you would like to write me. And I certainly will be grateful to you for a long, long time, and that's what I'm hoping to live a long time yet. And I'll be grateful to you through all those years, if you can tell me that. One of the most common inquiries I get is, how did Goose Pimple Junction get its name? Now I can tell you that. I'm not going to get into that today. That's not our purpose to be here today, but I can answer that question. But when it comes to Rooster Front, I do not have any answer. Enjoy the scenery as you watch the show today. It's a cooling, refreshing place. I should get out more often to these kind of places. I stay chained to the house most of the time in my telephone and typewriter, but I make a pledge every year to myself that I'm going to get out and view the parks. There's several around. Steel Creek right up the valley here. I'd like to do it. Let me give you a little history of this area. We're on the old James, and I'm speaking of Colonel James King plantation. He was the father of James King II, for whom our fine King University was named here in Bristol, Tennessee. I am glad I can say university now. I was on the board of visitors of that college for years, and I used to tell the hierarchy that I hope to live to see that become a university. I talked to one of the fellows just shortly before it did, and I said, I'm living, hoping I can live long enough, and I did. Anyway, the Colonel James King that I mentioned was the grandfather of Reverend James King, for whom I keep saying grandfather, I'm sorry. He was the father of James King, who did give his name to that college and then finally the university. Oh, Colonel James, my, what a past he had. He was born in County Derry, Ireland, 1752. When he was an early teenager, he left his home. They say it was because his father wanted him to be a minister, and he knew he was too worldly to make a good minister, and he lived to prove that most of the days of his life. He, for some reason, left the home when he was about 15. I can emphasize with that because I did the same thing. He went to London, England. Now, I didn't go to London, England. I was in Arkansas, and I went to the county seat town, which was Clarksville. But we both left home at about the same age. Somehow in London, he learned the trade of being a surveyor at that tender age. And in that city, he bought a surveyor's telescope. And that telescope still exists. It's in the hands of King College right now. I don't know whether they have it on public display or not, but that's where it is. Well, for some reason, he thought he better come to America. That was the land, the promised land. And he got on a sailing vessel and he came to Virginia. Landed in the eastern shores. And there he lived briefly. For some reason, he began to move inland, walking, I'm told, carrying his worldly goods with him, which wasn't very much, but among his worldly goods was that treasured telescope. He landed in what is now Montgomery County, Virginia, and there stayed a while. At that time, Montgomery County embraced a lot of territory, and he finally moved on westward, came into that portion which is now Floyd County, and there he took up at the home of Major Thomas Goodson. Major Thomas Goodson had been married twice, had a very large family, probably 14 or 15 children. Well, while working there with Major Goodson, doing surveying around, he fell in love. He was about 17 years old, 18, but he fell in love with a daughter of Major Goodson. Her name was Anna. Well, they made plans to be married. However, Major Goodson said this: that girl's only 13 years old, and you'll have to wait till she's 15 before we marry her. Okay, he agreed to that. Then he went westward to do some work while he waited for the time to pass to be married. He came right into this country here and did a lot of surveying for different people. He kindly fell in love with this country. For one thing, it's broad open territory with much land. He could have all the land he wanted, just about it. And he being from a rather prominent family, he thought it'd be wise to set up a good country estate somewhere in the back part of Virginia. He thought he was in Virginia when he's right here. He was actually in North Carolina, but then that change came later. Well, finally time came for him to go back to the Goodson place. He worked his way back there, surveying all along, all the while. And you know, when he got there, he became devastated. Because sweet little Anna, not willing to wait any longer for him, had eloped with a neighbor boy and come to Western Virginia. Of course, at the time, they didn't know where she went. She had just eloped with Samuel Eason, a neighbor boy who was much older than her. Well, at least he's in his late 20s, I think. But they just disappeared. They eloped away and went in the night, left in the night, and no one knew where they went for many, many years. Well, he fell into deep depression. You know, one of the causes of deep depression is being severely disappointed. And he certainly had a severe disappointment. In the same household was a daughter named Sarah. I don't know how many daughters that Major Goodson had. There was a number of them. But Sarah just came forward, feeling very sorry for this young man. He was just about to lose his mind. He was just about so far deep in depression that he's about out of it. And she came forward and said, well, if it suits you, all right, I'll marry you. And you know what? No modern antidepressant pill could have cured him any quicker of his severe depression. Yes, I'll accept your offer. And so he married Sarah. She, incidentally, was a sister of the mother of this Reverend King that I mentioned a while ago. She was, of course, sister to Sarah. She later, of course, came into this country. Well, Sarah and her new husband also packed up and came into this country. She was given a slave for her part of the dowry, and probably some more stuff, I don't know what. But anyway, the slave, of which I may have already spoken on this program, old Cy Goodson. And he lived and lived and lived until he supposedly was the oldest man in the world, right here in Bristol area. He is buried in our historic East Hill Cemetery. Supposedly he lived to be 132. We don't know that can be officially established. However, there's very good evidence that he was far over 100, and actually pretty good evidence that he was as old as he claimed. He didn't know his exact birth year or his birth date. All he knew was the apples were in bloom when he was born. He remembered his mother came down in labor with him, and she moved out in the yard from a hot slave cabin under an apple tree that was in bloom, and there's where he was born. That's all he knew. But through other sources, it appears that he was far over 100 years old. He helped to lay out the town of Bristol when he was 120. Well, old James King, Sarah's husband, established a home here on Beaver Creek. However, he soon went to Knoxville and stayed for a few years, but he came back here and lived the rest of his days right here on this plantation. Down the creek just a little ways from me now, right behind me here is where Steel Creek and Beaver Creek unite. They have their confluence. And down the creek just a short distance, there was a bend in Beaver, and that's not anything uncommon. There's all kinds of bends in Beaver Creek. But there's a big bend down there, and there was a grove of holly trees in the area encircled by the bend, or partly encircled by the bend. He called his estate Holly Bend, and there I think there was already a house on it which he added to, and it must have been settled for a while because there was a fruit-bearing orchard at the time on the place. Apple trees and pear trees and peach trees and all kinds of trees. That will figure in more of the story. He also not only had a home there, but he set up a furniture manufacturing place. Made furniture. I used to own a bed that he made, and I'm not really sorry I sold it because I got it in the hands of some of his descendants whom I'm sure will keep it. It's in a fine home on a beautiful street there in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I feel sure that they will take care of it, and they have children, I think, that will take care of it. It's on Richland Avenue, and if you know anything about Nashville, you know that's a mighty ritzy street. And the people who own it, I think, will keep it until they're gone, and then hopefully their family will keep it. Unfortunately, he didn't date his furniture and didn't put his name on it, but it's well known that that bed came from his manufacturing place. He also had a great hive of bees there, a big yard full, and he sold honey all over the country. And he also had a shop where he made the furniture. He also made coffins for this country, this area, and there was a big market, of course, for them. He was one of those fellows that everything he touched turned to gold, and before he was over with, he had plenty of gold, no doubt about that. In fact, he stored it in one of those caskets he built supposedly for himself, and he kept the place well haunted. He knew how to make ghosts in there so that no one would want to go there in the night time and look around. That's another story. You'll find that in some of my books. Tells all about it and how he accumulated a coffin full of gold coins. But for the time being now, we're going to have to close this, but number 2 story, which will follow later, will be concerning what he did after this portion of his lifetime ends. We'll tell you more when we meet again. Until then, may the best in life be yours.